Hello and welcome to the new episode of the Digital Innovators Podcast. And today I have a pleasure of talking to Jill Brafford. Hope I pronounced that well. And she is the Chief of Learning and Strategic Initiatives at the American Academy of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry, or AACAP, or as I learned, often pronounced as ACAP. And she has been with ACAP for 19 years and Jill, pleasure to have you here today.
Thanks for having me.
All right, great. It would be great if you can share with us a little bit about your organization. How big is it? How many members does it serve? How many annual meetings does it run? And who is really your core audience?
Sure. So, the American Academy of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry is the professional association for child and adolescent psychiatrists who are all physicians at the top of their training in children's mental health. We currently have 11,000 members and have a huge focus across the entire career lifespan for child and adolescent psychiatrists, starting in some cases with undergraduate, but definitely medical school through their residency and then all the way through retirement age. Our largest educational event of the year is our annual meeting, which now in our post-COVID world sees between 4,000 and 4,500 in-person attendees, and then typically another 1,000 to 1,500 virtual attendees for a true hybrid experience.
Okay, that's great. Thanks for sharing. And I'm really excited to deep dive into the story of digital innovation. We met roughly about 2 years ago, a little bit less than 2 years ago. I know you heard about Evermed, maybe from other associations, or you saw an ad or an email. And I know we had that was maybe October, November, about 2 years ago. And there's one thing that I never know during those first meetings, which is the whole context that the organization has around digital innovation at that point. So it's easier to discuss that right now. So if you can share a little bit like what was happening at your in your organization that led you to explore new approaches to digital education.
So, like everyone 2 years ago, we were still kind of mostly out of COVID, but still a lot of uncertainty about where education was going to go and how much of our education that pre COVID was traditionally in person education was going to convert to virtual. Lots of new technologies out there. So we were still very much in an uncertain place and trying to look to what others were doing to innovate and maximize both revenue and the experience for our members in terms of the variety of education that they might look to do. For our recorded content from the annual meetings, we've been recording annual meeting content since the days my staff reminded me of the cassette tape and literally, bringing cassette tapes on site to the annual meeting where people could get recordings of whatever had happened a couple days before and selling them in that form. And of course, that has evolved to fully digital recordings, but really hasn't changed a ton in probably 20 or 25 years. A slide with audio sync that happens at the annual meeting, which is sort of variable quality depending on the audio equipment that's in the room and the nature of the speakers and whether they use the microphones and all of those kinds of things. And then we, year over year would see 5 or 6 or 700 people who were annual meeting attendees buy these recordings so that they could maximize the content that they got from the annual meeting, knowing that with 40 concurrent things going on at the same time, they can't see everything. And then year over year, we would look at the metrics of how much those 5 or 6 or 700 people used it. And it was minuscule, the amount of minutes that we saw of people actually using this content. And so we were, sort of every year faced a dilemma of, well, this is a pretty reliable, reasonable revenue stream and nobody uses it. And so we couldn't justify just stopping to do that revenue stream. But we recognized it like the value also was not likely there. And we likened it to that. This book looks great. I'm going to buy this book. And then it sits on your shelf for 10 years and you never read it. But it makes you feel better to know that that book is on your shelf so that if you need that resource, you know where to go. And I think that's exactly why people were buying this content. We also recognized that a lot of the content that we were recording was 2 and 3 hour sessions, which was just not how people were consuming content. With TikTok and the other social media sites, people are like looking for 30 seconds or less. And so it was also that realization that this is not going to last a whole lot longer in the way that we do it. So we have not necessarily been the most innovative association over the years. We only brought a real online learning strategy to the organization in 2017, which at that time felt pretty late in the game. But, again, in this time in 23, 24, as we were sort of getting our fitting after COVID, we recognized that this was an area that we thought could generate more revenue and also, more importantly, I think, add a better member benefit than what we were providing with the hundreds of hours of content that many speakers take countless hours of time to create. And then in some cases, a relatively small audience actually sees on site at our annual.
Yeah, and I really like the analogies with books that you mentioned. So to make sure I understand, so you had hundreds of hours of content, and specifically starting with conference recordings, and the content I assume was fresh, credible, carried educational credits, and yet it wasn't really watched, consumed. It was monetized to a certain extent, and I assume it was also offered as like a single year access, so you can buy it as kind of like a catalog, so you can buy year after year, and so how was that content delivered? Was there anything that in the overall experience that led to the fact that you say usage was minuscule, or the fact that it was offered as like one by one and not consolidated? What were the real like specific reasons that your assumption for the reasons on why this content, even though it's fresh and credible and carries educational credits, is not really consumed?
Well, so it didn't carry educational credit. We did not offer CME credit for these recordings. If you went to the meeting, you could get the CME credit. But with the way that our IT infrastructure worked and ACCME guidelines, it was just sort of too cumbersome for us to add the CME credit. And lots of people still bought it without the CME credit because they get 90 CMEs at our annual meeting, which is more than anyone needs over a 3-year period in most cases. And so we didn't offer the credits to it. So that's always a discussion that we'll talk about. And frankly, we're still talking about with the new product. We sold it, as you said, as a package. You pay a certain price when you register, and then you get all of the recordings from that one single annual meeting. And then it was on a service that, a third party that we had used for at least a decade. And so if people bought it year over year, it was one login that they would go to and they could get to all of those different recordings. If they bought it 1 year and then 3 years later, again, same system. It does have the ability to allow people to purchase just one talk, 1 2-hour talk. So for people who just felt like, oh, I had to leave the conference early, I missed that one talk I really wanted to hear, for a very low cost, they could buy that one talk. So that was something that we thought was likely attractive to people. And some people did do that. But again, then when we went back to look at the actual minutes used of that content, it was really very low.
And what do you think was the reason for that? How about the user experience? Was that playing a role? How was the content delivered? Because
Yeah,
oftentimes we talk
I
to
mean,
associations.
it was on a website, not terribly user friendly. I mean, it had a search function, but it was kind of slow to load. It was a lot of content. And I think it also wasn't something that we were regularly putting in front of people. Like they would buy it and they'd get an email saying the content is now here. And maybe once a year we would say, hey, as a reminder, you bought this content, but it was really a set it and forget it kind of thing. And so it was on them to remember that they bought it and that that content might be useful. And so again, like going back to the book analogy, I think for a lot of people, they had to remember, "Oh, I heard that content 3 years ago at the conference. Let me go back and try and find that video." It was much more of a reactive kind of thing than a proactive type situation that your product has.
Yeah. Okay. Great. And then at the time when we met, what was the actual problem you wanted to solve? Was you wanted to have that content being more watched, monetized? Have you tried other approaches over the past, I could say, 5 years before we met?
Yeah, I have to say it was a little bit I do think it was like the cold email that you sent me that really got us to the point of having a demo, and whatever that email said, exactly said the problem we've been having year over year of, people want this, but they don't use this. And how can we provide a better product? So we weren't actively looking for this when we did the demo. Honestly, your email just caught my attention and I was kind of like, let's see what this is. This sounds new and interesting. And then went through the first couple meetings with you and kind of decided maybe this is a solution to the problem that we've been having year over year. And we looked and it didn't feel like there were any other competitors in this market offering quite the quality of the product that you were offering. And so it was, again, less a proactive search to solve this problem and more serendipity that, your product sort of aligned with what we with a need that we had for a long time. Yet it wasn't a need that rose so high on the to-do list that it was, a major we have to do something to solve this problem.
Yeah. No, thanks for sharing that because sometimes, when I talk to associations, they either, tried three, four different things, or it was kind of an acknowledged problem that didn't really have a solution on the market. And it was like, okay, it is what it is. We know that the content is fresh and credible, with or without CMEs. We know that we have hundreds, hours and maybe it's long and we know we should like make it more bite-sized, chunk down, maybe consolidate it. But, it's a lot of work also to deal with all that content. And also, we don't know whether there is another solution. I'm glad that it worked out, and I'm glad that the serendipity that met kind of an ongoing problem that was not didn't make it to a priority was kind of that match at that point.
Yeah, that's absolutely where we were, and I think based on the size of our staff at that time, there's lots of opportunities that we can have. Trying to do more over that problem, again, there always seemed to be something else that would maybe have better ROI until your product came along.
Well, glad to hear. And then, so when we met, so what stood out? We had several meetings, we had demo, we talked about different strategy, we talked about content, consolidation, engagement, monetization strategies. What is it really that stood out and made you feel more comfortable to explore further?
Yeah, a couple things. I think, you're sort of branding yourselves as the Netflix of whatever association. Just those couple words mean a lot to everybody because virtually everybody uses Netflix and I think understands what that Netflix experience is, both from the core navigation as well as the recommendations and the AI that goes into putting content in front of you that seems like content you're going to want to watch. So I think that user experience compared to the very old school user experience we had with the other company was really compelling. I think your sell on making the content shorter really resonated with us because again, it was something we knew was not nobody's watching 2-hour CME talks anymore, but we needed a reason to take the staff time to make those videos shorter and this gave us that monetized reason to do so. And then I'd say third is at this time coming into 2024, we did a reorg of the organization and added 6 new staff members, recognizing that we needed more staff to do all the things the organization is going to do. And then one of the things that came onto my plate was really looking at new revenue streams in order to support those new staff members. And so again, looking at your revenue models for how this could work and the value of a subscription model versus a one-off course by course model, which is really what we'd done up until this point, was really compelling.
Yeah, I'm glad to hear that because also the monetization paths are, there are many. There are five, the ones that we talk about, and subscription definitely an interesting one because, and I often say associations are great at subscription models because membership is a subscription. And sometimes we talk about it like it's something new. There's a lot of experience and know-how from anything to how to promote it, but also how to do renewal campaigns and how to drive retention and things like that. So was it anything about specific about the subscription that was attracted to you? You also looked at different models like bundles. What was your first reaction on how this can actually work within your ecosystem and your sphere at AACAP?
We really considered a lot of things everywhere from, just increasing the price of membership and including this as a member benefit to thinking about whether it would be included in annual meeting registration instead of an add-on, but everybody registering for the annual meeting would get it. In the end, we decided to try and keep it as similar to the existing path as possible, which is, buying it in addition or as an upgrade to the annual meeting. But of course, people can also buy it at any time of year as a subscription, with the thought that let's get these people who buy these recordings year over year anyway sort of hooked to this, and then we can have some testimonials and try and expand the market for this product. And once we're a few years in and have people who are renewing and really finding value in the product, then we could think about one of those models where we're sort of forcing everybody to buy it, if you will.
Yeah, yeah, that can be added to some sort of non-optional bundles with stuff. Someone called that recently, like with annual meetings or with membership. But I often say it really depends on what an association is trying to optimize for. And there are associations that are losing members or not being able to attract younger members, or there's an aging membership. In those situations, of course, you consider some sort of a bundle with membership. There are some associations that want to optimize for annual meetings and more attendees, and some want a new subscription model plus their sponsorship and other models. Okay, so we met and we met several times and we talked about this idea of consolidation of content so that it's all in one place and beautiful, easy to use user experience which unlocks engagement and new monetization models. And all of that is great, but sometimes the challenges are internal, not external. So maybe a great idea, a great innovation, it all sounds straightforward. But in order for something like this to happen, it's an important moment. So I was wondering, how did you, as an executive sponsor at the organization, who know the organization very well, we've been at 19 years with ACAP, how did you navigate this internally? Who did you actually have to talk to? Anything you can share? Who supported your digital innovation and being a digital innovation champion?
Sure, sure. And I'll start by saying, for those of you thinking about this product, do your homework before you sign on, because there were definitely some surprises for us from how we envision this product from an ideal marketing situation to what our association management system could actually do right then, to what our association management system might be able to do in the future with upgrades. And so it's just important to work through all of those conversations with your internal IT people to understand that. So, for example, as you said earlier, our membership is a subscription, and then we don't sell anything else as a subscription. So, adding a second subscription to the menu of things that we sell was a little bit more of a jump than I would have thought, than just adding a new product or a new event, which is something that we do all the time. So there were some workflows we had to do with that. Could a subscription be added on to the annual meeting registration all in the same seamless process? There was work that needed to happen in order for that to happen in that way. How are the payments processed? What are we going to do after do we have an automatic renewal payment system, which at the moment we don't? And so thinking through how are we going to reach out to people in a more manual way than certainly Netflix has to get that second year and third year of payment. What else? So most of the things have to do with whatever your AMS or major payment processing system is. What will the user experience be when they buy this? Where on the website will it be? Where will the site that markets this product be? How will people log in to the new system if they buy it? And how do that piece of information from one system, wherever you're purchasing it, move over to the Evermed system where they're actually getting the content? So, of course, it was a pretty simple SSO, but with any SSO, there's conversations that need to go along with that. So, in addition to IT, of course, then we also brought in our marketing and communications folks to think through how are we going to market this. Our communications and member services department is all under one director. So, at the executive level, it was one person, but really his whole team was involved in some of the decision making about what does the website look like, how are we going to coordinate emails that come out from Evermed with the emails that come out for ACAP and things like that to best market it. And then obviously from the payment side, which is more of our membership side, just making sure that people know that they've purchased it and what to do next, those kinds of things. Those were the key departments that we had to work with from a requirements perspective to make sure we knew what we were getting into. And then, of course, I also had to pitch it to our CEO, who I think was mainly interested in the revenue side and the benefit side and what our pitch was going to be to our members. But I did have a board presentation and both our sort of our smaller board and our larger board in order to get this approved.
And why do you think you were successful in it? Because you were successful.
It was really helpful. I don't know if you remember, you recorded like a little 5-minute demo of what this product is. And literally, we played that video for our members so that they could see, I think it was ACC's platform, of what it looked like and how you can put your, interested topics in it and how user friendly it was and really how much it mimicked a Netflix experience. And so, really, I painted a picture for them of what we're doing now, the revenue we're earning now, and then what it could look like with the jump to a new system, and then what the revenue looks like with the new system. And it was really a compelling case. I think people really liked the idea of having a platform where if we do have sort of one-off webinars or things like that, that it's an easy place to put it rather than either putting it behind a login on our website or just on a place on the website that no one's really going to go to unless we're pushing them there. But that a lot of this like more passive one-off content could find a home and hopefully get more views with the more interactive format.
I love what you said. This passive content finds new home because oftentimes it feels like archived, passive, somewhere there, as opposed to doctors and healthcare professionals actively engaging and watching and consuming and being curated. So suddenly it becomes like really active. You use the term book. Sometimes I think of like an old library where there are valuable books, but in some corners you can't find them versus somewhere where it's like really nicely organized and you really want to check it out. The other thing is two comments on what you said. So on, it's interesting, the AMS or CRM systems, everyone has a different system. And sometimes, even if associations are running membership for a long time, sometimes there is a system that doesn't support auto renewal. And auto renewal is like incredibly important for running subscriptions because of course, you do it in a way that informs a person that they're reaching that stage and you emphasize the value and all that. But if that has to be done manually, it just creates like so much work that should not exist in an ideal scenario. And so that's very important that can be synced. And then over time, as CRMs get better and AMSs get better and support that things become easier and workflows become more efficient. The other thing that you mentioned is getting your stakeholders. And oftentimes there is a need for a board presentation, right? And sometimes my experience has been with that, you know, high level, as you said, like benefits, revenue before and after, and really showing it visually. Right. Because I've heard situations where that board has not seen the actual platform. Sometimes they're very visual, very demonstrable, and they're having these discussions, but they haven't seen it. And that's one of the reasons why we record 5-minute videos. So you can press play and like, okay, so this is how it would look like. So let's have a discussion about that. But glad to hear that work. And then in terms of, we started to work together and we always have a goal to get to the launch in the 90 days. We recently had this experience where we reflected on that and had some feedback. So how was that whole experience? What surprised you? Anything from content to user interface to technology to integrations? What surprised you positively? What was easier? What was harder than you expected?
Sure. Overall, I've been through a lot of IT implementations over my years at ACAP, and this is one of the more smooth implementation processes. I would say Evermed has a really clear roadmap that you get on day one of implementation that walks you through what's going to happen week by week over those 90 days. I would say I was the number one doubter that this would actually get done in 90 days. We weren't quite there, but we were very close. And there were some good reasons why it was a couple weeks past, but really, I would say part of the success of getting it done in the 90 days was a lot of that pre-work that I mentioned, scoping out the IT things and things like that, because I think had that not been done, any number of things could have derailed us later on in the process. I think what I found most helpful with the implementation process is what you called your workshops. And there was like an email workshop and a revenue management. revenue maximization workshop, a couple others that were just
KPI workshop. Now I remember that you
KPI
mentioned the
workshop that
KPIs. That was useful.
and a couple that were just really helpful to hear the best practices and have my team talk together with your team about what our challenges might be, how we might be able to overcome those challenges, and really sort of fine tune our strategy even more before launch so we knew what was coming. And in many cases there were things like, oh yes, we'll start working on this 6 months out or 9 months out or a year out or whatever the case may be, but knowing that those things are down the road was really helpful, and knowing what kind of things we should be looking for early on in the process to then make some later decisions were really helpful. Also, the other thing I will flag is that Evermed provides a ton of templates for both the website text and the email text, as well as the market. So, email text that goes to people who have registered, as well as marketing email text to convince people to purchase the product that we really adapted, but it made it very easy for us to put a whole lot of content together for, in preparation for that launch. So those things went really well. I think, as usual, sometimes there can be miscommunications between IT folks when they're maybe talking on the side and then things happen. But as much as you can have a team implementation process, the better. Two other things I just want to flag as it relates to AMSs that I wish we were able to do, but we can't because of some limitations on our AMS. One is group purchasing, and it's something that we are hoping to move towards in our next AMS upgrade. But immediately within the first week of launch, I think we got two or three or four emails from people saying, hey, can I buy 10 of these? Can I buy 20 of these? Could I buy these for my group of residents? And we have a workaround, and we're trying to do those kinds of group discounting things if asked, but it's not something we're proactively promoting right now because we don't have a great IT infrastructure to support that. And then potentially more importantly, especially at launch, is a lot of people have asked, can I get a 1 week free trial? And our AMS just doesn't have a way of doing this. Either you purchase it and you get access or you don't. And I suspect that's how a lot of AMSs work. And so I think we perhaps could have more sales at this point if we had that 1 week free trial kind of thing. But what we're doing to get around it is obviously really maximizing the time that we get in front of our members in person at our annual meeting and having, demos and things like that in different places to try and move them, give them that sense of I know what I'm buying before they actually.
Yeah, no, there's a lot in what what you just shared, and I was taking some of the notes. And yeah, I think, and this is what we share during the sales process, the first point, and we really approach projects like this and as partnerships and a long-term relationship because and what do I mean by that? Because kind of it sounds generic when I say it, but it really means in real life that this is not, we're not, don't come across as a software vendor. Here's the technology, we launch it and see you in 3 months. It's really, we know that technology is a vehicle. And at the end of the day, you care about the outcomes and about the results. And in this case, you know, it's engagement, it's revenue, as you said. So better user experience. And in that sense, if we don't provide that support and help and best practices and copy and templates and all that, then you don't have a complete solution and help with content and cutting and editing and thumbnails and metadata and descriptions and captions. So all of that is needed to have success. And so that's where we love to work like that. It's also more fun because you're kind of really solving problems as opposed to coming up with like one little piece and focusing on that. And I remember we did have several meetings on, tuning. I like the word tuning, like tuning the forecast, tuning the monetization paths, tuning the, like, what's the strategy for monetization and what paths you are going to go after. Now, it's interesting that you mentioned group purchase. So I wasn't aware of that. And we talk about it as monetization path number four. Like first is subscription, then is bundle with annual meeting, then number three is bundle with membership, and then number four is individual subscriptions or group purchases, and number five is year-round sponsorship. So it's interesting that that already happened in the first few weeks since launch, and that there are institutions, employer groups, physician groups that want to buy multiple licenses. Great to hear. And then interesting, the free trial, that's something that's on a lot on our mind because the free trial as well as free tier, right? As a way, like let's say Spotify has a free tier, and then I think it has ads, and then you can, but you still have access to the full library, or have a limited library, or have a limited library but without CMEs, whereas the premium one has CMEs. So volume of content, credits, freshness of content, all of that could be play are potential ways to play it with to potential use a free tier. We're constantly looking into that. It's a very, very interesting strategy, and finding like what's attractive enough for that tier versus what's attractive for the premium is a little bit of art, a little bit of science, a little bit knowing your audience. Great. And then did you use conference content at launch, or do you consider other types of content? And was that content previously in an LMS system and now it's different, like in the Power Platform?
Yeah, thanks. I realized I totally washed over the content part of it, which is the core of the product. So we decided to use the two previous years' annual meetings worth of content. And so, again, a lot of this work was done before we even signed the contract, knowing that within the first 30 days of that 90 days, you were going to need all of that content. So we worked with our old vendor to look at that content, look at how we would edit down that content. And there was a financial output of money that had to go into taking that content, which was again in like the 2 or 3 hour chunks, and dividing it into more like 20 to 30-minute segments. But as we looked at it, there was a rhyme and reason. There were some clear breaks, when we changed from one speaker to the other, cut it and start a new video, that made it a little more affordable than we thought it was going to be. And then moving forward, we're really thinking about how we're capturing this content to begin with at the annual meeting to make it even easier moving forward to get this next year's worth of annual meeting content into the system. The 2 years was sort of arbitrary. 3 years felt like it was too old. 2 years for us with the volume of content, it's, I think, maybe 300 hours of content or so per year. That felt like a good amount of volume that you were going to get that Netflix experience and have enough variety, especially when it was cut into smaller chunks, that it would feel like a substantial library. But yeah, that was a lot of work, again, before contract signing and implementation started, to lay the groundwork and then also pull reports from actually a couple of different systems we had to inform the tagging and the topics and the titles and, all of the other back end stuff. As I'm talking about it, I'm thinking about another sort of surprise was the X feature that I think we weren't quite prepared for, and thinking about, did we want every single speaker, which would have been, 2,000 speakers who may have spoken at those two annual meetings, to have an expert profile? And if not, then how do we pick those experts and how do we get, headshots and bios and things like that, which we don't necessarily collect from every speaker for all of those folks. So that was something we sort of did on the back end and might do a little bit better with this next year's worth of content in terms of collecting a little bit more information about those speakers to make the Evermed site a little more appealing to find.
No, that's great. And are you considering other types of content, or if you have other types of content apart from the conference content?
So at the moment for year one, we're really just focusing on the conference content because there's a lot of it and it's sort of the lowest hanging fruit. The other sort of topic we haven't gotten into here is the CME versus non-CME. And I know a lot of your other clients have offered CME with this. We really went back and forth a lot on this point. In the end, for year one, we decided not to offer CME for this content. Mostly, well, for two reasons. One, there were some IT complications that our existing learning management system did not make it super easy for people to say, if it's a year's worth of content, to get to get one certificate in June and then another certificate in December, and claim multiple times in the same year on the same activity. We've sort of ran into a roadblock with our current system. We're looking into upgrading that system. But then we also really worried about cannibalization. And we have this really great virtual annual meeting, which is still relatively new. It came about after COVID, with 1,100 people or so purchasing it every year. And if we're offering CME for all the conference recordings, will that virtual annual meeting revenue go away and people will pick one or the other instead of both, which is basically what was happening before. So we're going to experiment this year and see how it goes, and may make some different decisions. We're hoping maybe 18 months in to have the technology infrastructure to do the CME, but we're really thinking about the model that you shared of sort of a lower price for no CME or maybe free, but probably not. And then, sort of an add-on price if you want the CME, recognizing that CME isn't the value of this to everybody.
Yeah, and that's where every association is a little bit different. For example, you have very successful virtual offering, virtual live offering as well. So trying to make those trade-offs and how do we maximize those streams and maximize the engagement without hurting any of the other streams? It's a big question, and that's we try to be of help with in those workshops as well, knowing that you know your audience and your models the best, of course. And we have you from working across the associations. Now, interesting one thing that I learned that I was never a CME expert and now I know much more about the ACCME guidelines and everything that associations that we work with that offer CME or conference content, they kind of they submit for that review and approval in one go. So they don't some do it separately I've seen and I don't know why, not our clients, but I've seen first there is basically conference itself, but then they take 2 3 months to get like the on demand approved. Whereas what I've seen works much better is to have it both on demand and conference content reviewed and approved at the same time. It just saves a lot of time as well, and it's possible. And then, of course, in most cases, at least from the rules that I know, that content can last for 3 years in terms of having CME credits. So sometimes I see that being a determining factor of how much content we can offer. Although I've seen association offer 20 years of content because sometimes there is a clinical study that's a landmark study that was done 5 years ago. And me as a user, I want to like see that presentation or see the slide deck from that time. But last 3 years, I can get CME credit. So, but again, every situation is a little bit different. And then you just launched a few months ago the platform. We never shared the name. It's called PsychStream. And then was there any moment when you launched it that you remember that you're like, okay, this was a good move, was not a good move, was the right move? And then any feedback or result you can share. I know it's early, but anything you can share in the last few months.
Yeah, we're still pretty early. Right as we launched, I fortuitously had the opportunity to present in front of a couple hundred people that were gathered for a smaller meeting and just do a quick demo and got some really great feedback immediately when they saw it and could really see the use cases and were already sort of engaging with me. Can we do this? Can we do that? Can you put this video content on it? So it was great to see that initial reaction to the platform. We launched in May. Our annual meeting registration just launched 5 days ago. And so it's during this annual meeting registration time that we're really hoping to see the biggest uptick. So far in 5 days, we've gotten 21 new users. Moderate so far. We'll see. Like I said, I think that since it's a new product, that on site experience and being able to demo it is really going to help with conversion. But really thrilled to see our some of the stats for the people who are using the platform so far. We've had 83% activation rate, which is essentially that people have purchased the product and then watched one video. So again, we launched the beginning of May. We're recording this the beginning of August. So 83% to me, considering the, 1% of people that watch the content in the old system is an amazing stat. Total engagement time, again, over the 3 months is 281 hours. So average watch time is 2 hours and 37 minutes. Again, for, not Netflix, not core entertainment, but rather medical education. I think those are really strong numbers. And I think what's reassuring is when we look at the most popular videos, the most popular topics, they're the same topics that we hear over and over again, what our members want. So it's just consistent that there is a need for this more content. There's an interest in this content. And hopefully it's helping our doctors be better doctors and treat kids who are really sick with mental illness. So recognizing that there are lots of different learning styles, I hope that we're providing yet another avenue and yet another way to learn for our members. And again, reusing that great content that in many cases is seen once and then died in the old model and hopefully being able to get that research and clinical advice out to a larger number of both our members and non-members.
Oh, thank you for sharing that. And just to put things into perspective. First of all, the number of users, registrations, and that's of course an important metric. And you just launched, and it's something that grows, of course, over time, especially with subscription. Some organizations that choose to bundle it with a new meeting or membership, they have this large influx at once. But the other one, and this is what we look at first, is really the engagement. Because at the end of the day, if there is engagement, this means there is a value in this content and the overall experience. And when there is value, that means that opens the door for subscription and for sponsorship for many other models. So I was just writing down, I didn't know there was 1% activation or 1% of people watch content in the past. Now I have 87%. I just want to clarify that that's not 1%, 10% increase. That's from 1% of people accessing content to 87% of people accessing content. So it's 87 times more. The other one is, I think you launched it in like 3 months, I think so far. Yeah. So 2 hours and 37 minutes. I was writing down 2 hours, 37 minutes. And if you divide it by month, that's, about 40 something minutes per user per month. We're talking average. And oftentimes I see stats from what it was before users had this kind of experience. And it was like 2 minutes per user per month average, like 2 minutes. So we're talking about 10 times, 20 times, 30 times difference. So I just want to let that sink in because this is probably our biggest message to the market, that content can be watched and consumed to like 10, 20, 30 times more. And that opens up the door to monetization and everything else. And so thanks for sharing that. I was actually never used this platform to share the screen, but maybe next time I'll kind of share also the screen and show the platform. But it's psychstream.aacap. And if you want to check out how the experience that or the first page landing page, great. And then in terms of success going forward, what are you focusing on KPIs or success going forward, and any advice you would give to any other association that is thinking of modernizing digital education in such way?
Yeah, like I said, we're really looking forward to being in front of our members at the annual meeting and thinking about both how can we highlight the people who have purchased this already and chat with them and get them to chat with others about the platform, but then obviously work towards conversion of more and more of our members and have this be, what they would consider to be part of their ACAP membership, if you will, that sort of a vital part of their education. And then we'll look forward to seeing, next May, what does the renewal look like? Where are we in terms of total subscriptions at that point? And then are people continuing to renew? And that's a big unknown for us. We of course know what renewals look like for our membership, but this is a different product and, sort of a new risk for us that we're sort of guessing without history. So that's something I'm looking forward to keeping an eye on and watching and preparing for. And then I think the CME decision will be an interesting one to watch. CME versus the cannibalization and how much content are our members or non-members willing to purchase, and how much is too much. But that non-member audience, we didn't really touch on that. That's another key focus for us strategically is growing that non-member audience. There are a lot of non-physicians who treat mental illnesses who would value this content, but there's a lot of physicians who don't necessarily specialize in mental health, but who are treating mental health, treating kids. And there's a huge shortage of child and adolescent psychiatrists. Like many subspecialties, there are not enough. And so the more that we can share some of this education with those who are doing parts of that treatment planning for kids, hopefully, again, we're increasing access to care.
Yeah, for sure. You have a large non-member audience, so I think that's very important to care. And that's where subscription can be huge because if you have, 10,000 members, let's say, but you have, many, many more non-members, that opens up the door to a subscription model as well. And any last words in terms of advice for others?
Suspects there are a lot in the same boat as us with a ton of content. It's what associations do is create content, wishing that you could do more with this content. And so I encourage you to start talking with the Evermed team and looking at their case studies and their success stories and thinking about this as a way that you might be able to maximize that content and revenue for your organization. Non-dues revenue is always a topic. And I think this is a great product to do both adding value and adding revenue. So thanks for bringing it to us.
Thank you, first of all, and thanks for recognizing this work. We really, we know that digital innovation is not easy to drive and that champions internally do need to have information and knowledge from other associations. Associations tend to be quite collaborative with other associations. I can see that clients get called all the time by others, and we don't know about that most of the time. So thanks for sharing today's story and a real life case study. And it was just launched, 3 months ago. It will be interesting to see like a year from now to continue the conversations. Thanks for sharing also the numbers and the story behind and where the organization was before we met and started talking. We'll stay for another minute, so make sure that this gets uploaded. And but really, thank you so much for being a guest today.
Happy to be here.